This is Michael Clara coming to you from Salt Lake City, Utah, with update number 10 to the Spencer Cox signature list cover-up. This will be the last update in the cover-up series, as we have blown the lid off the cover-up. This presentation will bring us up to date on where we are at with exposing the rigging of the signature verification process and what I recommend our next steps should be. By way of review, this cover-up series, or Signature Gate, as some have called it, revolved around two state laws. The first one is in the Election Code 28-1-1002, and that prescribes a process that a county clerk would follow to verify, or should follow, to verify signatures on a candidate petition signature packet. The second law is found in GRAMA, which stands for the Government Records Access Management Act. This law declares that the list of those that sign candidate petitions is a public document and should be released in response to a records request. My introduction into the Signature Gate was in May of this year when I was helping out a fellow delegate and submitted a records request for State Senator Ibsen's signature list. As everyone is aware, that records request was denied on the basis that it was the subject of a criminal investigation. That resulted in me filing an appeal and eventually finding myself at a hearing before the State Records Committee with Phil Lyman and Natalie Clausen joining me as what GRAMA calls interveners. The cover-up series started with my posting of a video 3 months ago, telling my story of a records request I submitted to the Utah Attorney General's office seeking records in relation to an investigation they were conducting into the Cox signature list. They denied my records request on the basis that no such records existed because no investigation was being conducted. I eventually had to file an appeal with the State Records Committee, and the Executive Secretary of the Records Committee refused to even schedule my appeal for a hearing, which was unusual. That act compelled me to go public with what I perceived to be a cover-up of wrongdoing in the signature verification process for Governor Cox. Update number 1 was about how the State Records Committee ordered the Washington County Attorney to release State Senator Ibsen's signature list once they concluded their investigation. However, the following month, which was in August, they completed the investigation and refused to release it, claiming they could not release it because the Attorney General's office took possession of it. I filed an appeal in 3rd District Court. Update number 2 was my announcement that I was able to file a lawsuit in 3rd District Court against the State Records Committee for their refusal to schedule my appeal of the Attorney General's concealing the existence of an investigation into the Cox signature list. I also go over the release of State Auditor John Dougal's bombshell audit confirming the candidate Phil Lyman's suspicion that Cox fell short of the required signatures to be on the primary ballot. Update number 3, I dive into the duplicitous actions of the Davis County Clerk Brian McKenzie and his role in the cover-up of the Cox signature list. In update number 4, I respond to an email sent out by Utah County Republican Secretary attempting to justify the actions of the Davis County Clerk and the Utah Attorney General's office in concealing election records from public view. In update number 5, I respond to Lieutenant Governor Henderson's attempts to gaslight anyone who asked questions about Utah elections process. I also called upon Greg Hughes to cover this issue on KNRS, the Rod and Greg Show, which he did. And update number 6 is my response to the Utah Legislative Auditor, who once again confirmed what Phil Lyman was suspicious of, that Governor Cox fell short of the required signatures to be on the 2024 ballot. Ironically, this audit shows that Cox was short signatures by a much wider margin than the audit released the previous month by the state auditor. And update number 7 is my analysis of a letter that Utah County Clerk Aaron Davidson wrote, where he raised many valid concerns about the signature verification process. And update number 8 is my analysis of the Davis County Clerk McKenzie's email that he wrote in response to the Utah County Clerk Davison's letter. This set up a situation of dueling county clerks with no clarification, even to this day, from the Lieutenant Governor, who holds the title of Chief Election Officer in the state of Utah. Update number 9, I show how the legislative auditor revealed that the Davis County Clerk and the Lieutenant Governor's office colluded to hide signature packets in violation of state law. So that brings us full circle, and part of the cover-up that's been uncovered. Here's an illustration of that is that in response to a records request, I obtained this email where Ryan Cowley, the elections director in the Lieutenant Governor's office, is talking about the investigation into the Cox signature list. This is significant in that it reveals that this investigation was happening in March of this year, 4 months prior to my records request to the Attorney General's office for records of this very investigation. And as if we needed it, we ended up getting more confirmation in September that the legislative auditor was unequivocal that such an investigation was indeed occurring by the Attorney General. More recently, in response to the legislative auditor disclosing that the Lieutenant Governor is concealing 100 plus Cox signature packets, I submitted a records request for a list of those signatures that were on those missing packets. Last week, the Lieutenant Governor's office records officer denied my request on the basis that the records are protected because there is an ongoing investigation by the Attorney General. You see, they got tangled up in their own lies. In response to my records request, I received responses that are in conflict with each other. Here is the Attorney General saying one thing. Here is the Lieutenant Governor's office saying another. And they both cannot be true. And I point that out in my appeal to the Lieutenant Governor's office. However, in this instance, the classification is inadequate under GRAMA. 3 months ago, in response to a records request appeal to the Attorney General, I received the attached August 7, 24 response from Daniel Burton, General Counsel, wherein his denial of my appeal refutes the protected classification now invoked by the Lieutenant Governor's office. Moreover, in the attached August 14th, the Executive Secretary of the State Records Committee would not even schedule my appeal before the State Records Committee because the determination was made that no investigation into the Cox signature list existed. Accordingly, the records in dispute should be released because no credible protected classification under GRAMA has been offered. So let's see how they respond to that. The other thing that I believe that we can celebrate is the fact that, or I guess I would call it another achievement, is that the Records Committee was audited themselves, and it says need to do more to be efficient and keep cases out of court, according to state audit. So, in that, I can announce that they have now started receiving. At least there's one that I filed with them 2 weeks ago, and they accepted it. So we're back on track with the State Records Committee. In closing, I want to share a personal experience as a candidate for public office. 20 years ago, I ran for a seat on the Salt Lake City Board of Education, and I lost the election by 1 vote. So as the Deseret News op-ed here says, the moral of the story is that local elections can turn on a handful of votes. I ended up running, I waited 2 terms. The Alamo Luave, who was in office 8 years later, things, in my opinion, still weren't being improved at the school district. So I ran again for a seat on the board. But I just want to point out here that in 2012, Uluave, who has served on the board for the past 2 terms, said his priority will be fostering a sense of accountability within the school board in the district. He said that the district is reluctant to share negative information with the community. The transparency is skewed. They let us know just enough to keep everything hunky-dory. And that's why I ended up running, because he was right. That was the problem. And in 2012, I won the election to the school board that year. One other thing I want to point out is that, so my point is that I understand the value of votes and counting ballots, and I'm no stranger to that on a personal level. And the other thing I want to point out, though, I do trust the system here in Salt Lake City. I know, like this year, I mailed my ballot, and I know that I can track my ballot, and I've done it several times since we've had mail-in ballots. I think maybe the first year I was suspicious and didn't do it, but after that I did, because I know that I can mail my ballot at the post office here in Salt Lake City on Redwood Road and 2100 South before 8 p.m., and it will get to the clerk's office the following day, and my vote will be counted. So I just want to throw that in there, that I do trust the system here in Salt Lake City. Now, if I lived in Davis County, I wouldn't trust it, because that's where we have Brian McKenzie. So while this is the end of the cover-up series videos, there's still much more to be told about Signature Gate and how the Attorney General, the Lieutenant Governor, and the Davis County Clerk got away with rigging the signature verification process on behalf of Governor Cox. So I'll start a new series of videos. The title of them is yet to be revealed, but it'll have 2025 in it. And one of the things I do want to cover in that is that those of you that have followed this cover-up series will recognize the Davis County Clerk, Brian McKenzie, and Lieutenant Governor's Election Director, Ryan Cowley. Currently, changes in election law occur at the behest of these 2 bozos, and we need to change that. In researching the signature verification process, I noted that these 2 play ping pong with the legislators in committee. Ryan Cowley sits in front of the committee and expresses the need for some new legislation. And then McKenzie shows up at the part where the public is supposed to be talking, and he says during that public comment section, he tells the legislators that all the clerks in the state of Utah have reviewed this legislation, and it's a good piece of legislation. And not only that, he even thinks it's a good piece of legislation. So anyways, to me, that's just mockery, because these guys, as I pointed out in one of the videos, they're the ones that get a law passed and then turn around and don't follow it. And I'll have more on that in the new video series. But as citizens, we need to commit to tracking any bill in the 2025 legislative session that has to do with the election code. We then need to commit to attending legislative committee meetings in January and February and speaking for or against the election legislation. We need these 2 to understand that their days of serving as the gatekeepers for election legislation are done.